Welcome to No Room for Phonies, Matters of the Heart, Part 2, and I think it's episode 68 or 69.
68, I believe.
So we're advertising Bublé today.
Bubbly.
I like Michael Bublé, and this actually is excellent. It has no sugar.
Just carbonated water and natural
and yours is
flavor.
cherry, and mine is lime. Very good. Okay, so my green light moment is I read this book called Stuck, The Science of Stuck.
The Science of Stuck, yep.
Anyway, one of the things that she talks about, and I think I've posted this a couple of times as like Facebook things, and it's that whole idea that you can hold two things in your life, good and bad, difficult and easy, and even if you've had, just because you've endured some kind of trauma doesn't mean you can't have, enjoy life and whatever. And to me, it's the Kate Bowler philosophy of life, right? Because she has holding joy and extreme sorrow and anxiety and fear and whatever, because she has a very bad cancer and doesn't really know what the next bit of her life is going to look like. So she just holds both those things
at the same time
in her heart. So it's, I don't know, it just was a bit of a moment for me, because you just think, well, I just want to be happy. I want my life to be happy. And then you realize that life is actually happy and sad all at the same time.
It is.
And
the other thing I like about that book is, sorry, it escapes me now. I'm going to have to edit this back in.
Okay. You don't have to edit it back in. It can escape you, and we don't. You can.
But it was a deep thought.
It was a deep thought, and
it was a good moment.
I just feel like that book really emphasized that, because, you can have anxiety, you can have issues, you can have things happening in your life. And there's a difference between moments of pure happiness, where you're just enjoying life and whatever it is you do to enjoy life, and an overarching kind of deeper joy that's spiritual.
Right.
And I feel,
do remember now the point. But keep going. I don't want to end it.
But, and that's what that's what I find from Kate Bowler, is that there's this, she has these happy times, and you can see them in her posts, right? Things she does with her son and stuff. And, when we spent time the other night with the little kids, with Jade's little kid. Yeah. And that was just happiness, like listening to the kids giggle and play, and little Charlotte learning to talk, and doing her rocks.
Let go of the other things that are weighing you down, or the adult life. It just all, whatever.
Because that's a moment of pure happiness that kind of feeds the. I always used to say it was like the emotional bank account, where you put deposits in that of little things like those kinds of things. Yep. Or you have a dinner party and everybody's just drinking wine and talking and relaxing and whatever.
Or my favorite way to recharge the bank account is just to be alone and knit for an hour.
Yeah, like those kinds of things. But then those little deposits bring about that sort of overarching joy. But anyway, what were you going to say that was deep?
Well, no, another point from the book of The Science of Stuck is that as you were talking about not happiness, we aren't wired for happiness. Our brains aren't wired, and our bodies aren't wired for happiness. We are wired for survival.
Right.
And so the joy part is an effort. It's not something that just happens because we've aligned the planets or we've done something crazy great. Our bodies are still going to slide into survival mode much faster.
Yeah. And that's what happens if you've experienced trauma of any kind. I think you have to work at letting your brain slide into survival mode faster.
Yeah.
Right? It's harder to keep your brain out of survival mode.
Right.
But anyway, so that was my green light moment, and a shout out to Mason and Charlotte for those moments of happiness. They were very fun that night. and such good children, like such self-regulated kids, because they go to bed, they eat, they're normal kids. They just like have their
meltdowns and their whatever
and their things and their wanting and this and that, but they because they have because they feel so safe with their parents, right?
And they understand their routine.
And they have their routine in their heads that it's so easy to like just...
Another time we'll have to give that tip that you use to help them go to bed with the list.
Well, that was funny. Actually, that's worth saying because it actually fits in later. So I'll talk about it later. Okay, the book recommendations. We both listened to this story called One of Us. It was on Audible, and it's just
Australian mystery kind of, but weird. Also not family
turmoil. Anyway, it was just a listen.
It's a very fun listen.
Yeah, it was a good listen. And then Stolen Life is the story of oh my gosh, why can't I remember what I'm trying to say? Aboriginal, right? Woman.
Indigenous.
Oh, sorry. My brain is just... It's not the usual like morning time when we do this, so it might take me a bit of... Anyway, Indigenous woman who is incarcerated for murder, and her story, and it's a true story, and she co-writes it with a guy by the name of Rudy Weeb.
Oh, right.
And it's fascinating, their relationship just in building the story.
Okay.
So it's excellent. And then the podcast recommendation is yours.
Yes. The podcast itself is called You Are Not So Smart. And it's named after a book of the same title. But the podcaster has authored other books
and since then. One that I'm reading right now called Changing Minds.
Changing Minds is by him.
Yeah, it's amazing story.
Yeah.
Book. It's
and
a book of stories about
anecdotes.
It's got a lot of anecdotes in it, and it's really, really good.
But he interviews Adam Grant, who has written the book called Think Again. And anyway, it's an excellent podcast. The episode is 232. You Are Not So Smart.
All right. So Matters of the Heart, Part 2. And the big question that I'm starting out with: how should we show emotion as adults, and what does healthy adult self-regulation look like? So I want to tell the story of little Mason, and he prefers his mommy...
That's children self-regulation.
I know, but I want to just say, he prefers his mother to put him to bed, but his mother was gone out with his dad, so that was not an option. But she had left this list of everything that he normally does before he goes to bed.
It's okay.
Okay.
Yeah, that's fair.
Can we tell if it's recording though?
Yes.
Okay. Because, and so when he was starting to, I thought he was starting to be a bit dysregulated, like he was, didn't know quite what to do and knew that he couldn't have his mom, but just didn't quite know. So I said, well, you know that mom left us a list of everything we're supposed to do before you go to bed. And so he was very focused on that list. Look, he's 3, so he doesn't really read yet, but he looked like he was reading it.
Yeah.
He wanted me to read it to him. And then at the end, he was kind of like, did we do everything we were supposed to do before I go to... So I just thought it was just an interesting way.
And that totally settled him down.
Right. But he paused, and I think like... a healthy adult self-regulation actually looks like that meta moment.
Right. Where you
and
pause
to me,
and you think
that was an example of his meta moment. Like he just paused. He thought about it as in terms of how is this going to kind of, I mean, I don't think he totally thought, how is this going to help me? But I was thinking how this might help him, but he wasn't.
No, but it was like, okay, mom's not here, but her words are here or whatever.
Right.
However,
and our routine is here.
Yeah.
And everything that I normally do
and
is going to have.
Me are here.
Yes. So, and whatever. So I think one of the biggest things that I learned from that book, Permission to Feel, is this meta moment that you take where you you take this big pause when you're actually starting to feel Like,
yeah,
you are not regulated anymore.
Mm-hmm.
And he calls it a meta moment.
Yeah.
Do you agree with that? Or is there something?
Well, it comes from metacognition, where it just means you're outside of yourself, looking in on your thoughts, looking in on your emotions.
Which is interesting because the book on change also talks about meta moments, but they're meta thinking moments.
Yeah.
Where you're actually using metacognition, thinking about thinking.
Yeah.
And this is kind of where I think, how do we show emotions as adults? We show emotions as adults the same way
children do.
Well, we have those same feelings.
And it's okay to express anger, to cry, to laugh, to show fear.
And I love it when our...
But I would say an unhealthy way to show emotion is the repressed one, or the blasting flare-up that's constant. Like, I think we all are... It's okay for us to have the occasional angry burst out or whatever, but when it's that constant... day in, day out, always keyed up, always
right.
angry,
But then you're like in an abusive,
always crying, or the fake always happy. Sorry.
Yes, true. And I mean, I think the other thing is, when you are, when that is how you actually feel, and you can't take a meta moment and regulate yourself. In the book Stuck, The Science of Stuck, that is when she's saying you need to go get help. Like you can't just. So, I mean, how do we handle conflict? Are there healthy ways to manage conflict in situations of high emotion? Like
like conflict between people. Sometimes it's a matter of just saying, okay, now we are yelling at each other and it's not productive. Let's take 10 minutes to go our separate ways and think about what we want to say and come back. And then let's just listen and take turns. Well,
the one thing that they said in Permission to Feel was that you can actually have like in a marriage or even like
siblings or whatever,
or even in a workplace, you can have norms about how conflict is handled.
Right.
Like, and they were saying, like, in school situations, they have this ruler, but they have norms about how things are handled. And I mean, I think for some people, it would seem really strange to do that. Like to sit down and
like
say,
to have a system almost,
right? Like, and I mean, they went so far as to say, like in marriages, they suggest that you even have a place in the house where you sit down and one person has one chair and the other person has the other chair, and you're far enough apart that you have space, and that if somebody says almost like a safe word, that then they can take 10 minutes and just regroup they said...
Can you imagine? I mean, for couples where it reached to the point, not where there's physical violence, but it's that, that name calling and shut up and you're an asshole and pardon, I bleeped that out.
No, but I mean, like, we don't understand that because we've never gotten to that.
You can see why that would be necessary to.
And then it says like this whole idea,
a mnemonic almost to help you.
Yeah, and they said to go so far as to make it almost like a contract, like this is what we do, and like all these statements about how to have a healthy marriage, will never go to bed angry, but sometimes if something comes up and it's like 10 o'clock at night, that's not a good time to solve a problem.
It's better to actually
sleep on it and then face it. I mean, even if each person writes it out, what they want to say, but not share it with each other, just get it off your chest so that you maybe can fall asleep. Yeah. And just not ruminate on it all night. I just thought it was very, interesting that there are other ways to manage conflict. And I think in that book, Change, right, where you allow people to tell their story, and you kind of then look for common ground. Yeah. Because if you don't listen to the other person's story, you kind of can't find that common ground. If you're busy
thinking of how you're going to argue back.
Yeah. And this one, what do you do if you really screw up? And I think most people would say, if you really screw up, you just apologize. And in the book that
that's stage 1 only.
well, and they had a big thing in the one book about forgiveness, and that forgiveness is really like not a prerequisite to healing your trauma. That sometimes you're just not ready to forgive.
Right.
Like, forgiveness is, there's other things that can be done, but I think one of the things that hit me the most was the idea that sorry, like, I mean, I've dealt with this a million times with kids, right?
Yeah.
You say you're sorry, and you say you're sorry, and you say you're sorry, and you say you're sorry. And they all go, sorry. And then the teacher, or you say you're sorry to the teacher.
Right.
Because the teacher wants them to say they're sorry. And they're like, sorry. And then the teacher's mad because of the way they said they were sorry.
Right.
And so the whole bit about making restitution and making amends is way more important than the words, I'm sorry.
Right.
And forgiveness kind of has to happen after amends are kind of made. And interesting, like, sometimes I would say, you know what, I would say to the teacher, you know what, he's in no shape right now to say he's sorry. Like, this child, he, she, whatever, is just going to be snappy, and it's not going to go well because you're not going to like the way they say it. So I have told them that if they are truly sorry, these are the 3 things they can do in class or outside or wherever to demonstrate that they're sorry.
Yeah.
They can sit down, they can get their work done, and they can keep their mouth shut when they're supposed to. And if then they can prove that they're sorry. And then you don't have to listen to that. Because right now, and I would also say to kids, you and the teacher are pretty mad at each other right now. So if you need 15 minutes to just sit here, when you're ready to do the things that you know are going to be acceptable to your teacher, then go back.
Right.
But don't just go back in there and start all over again, because then you're back to square one. So that whole thing about kind of restitution and amends, and I think that's more important than the...
what's the other word, R word, other than restitution? There was another... reparation?
I don't know.
Anyway.
So anyway, that was kind of my... and navigating through trauma, I found this section on her that she talked about trauma, sort of feeling like everybody has experienced trauma in some way.
Yeah. I haven't read very far in the book yet, but I got the idea that trauma is quite common across the ground, but she's not talking about living through a tornado or being in a gun shootout or military trauma. She's talking about trauma with a little t, which is still serious.
Yes. And I think the other thing about that is you have to remember that you can't compare
each person's trauma
like it, or how it impacts them, and and
well, like for me, being pulled from Colombia to move to Canada at 17 was traumatic,
right?
But other people would say, well, that really isn't trauma, but it did lead to depression, suicidal thoughts. Like, it was pretty serious.
Yes.
And other people have the similar experience, and they just go with the flow for that particular transition.
Right.
But another thing might be traumatic for them.
Right. But I think what I most liked about her section on it is that you just have to keep moving forward. And I know that when I have had things like that, like I was just reading a novel. I know it sounds crazy, it's a novel, but she talked about a terrible situation she had gone through with a marriage. And she said that in order to get through it, she just walked. And she felt like by walking, she was always moving forward.
Okay.
And so that to get through trauma, you just have to kind of keep moving forward.
Right.
And that's
we know that it comes along with you, but
And that's when she talks about like holding the good and the bad at the same time. You still have the trauma in you, but you can...
Well, I haven't finished the
book, can still enjoy life.
Yeah, but there's a lot of, like, you can work your way out of trauma. Doesn't she say that? Yeah. Like to a point where heal. Where it's resolved.
Like a traumatic experience doesn't have to be like with you
for your whole life.
You can work.
Yeah, and sometimes you can do it alone. Sometimes you need a counselor or a therapist, but yeah.
I love this idea. Like we've all heard of just having like an attitude of gratitude. Just be happy and be thankful.
Yeah, be thankful. Wake up every morning and say what you're thankful for. And then before you go to bed, write down what you're thankful for, which isn't a bad tool.
No, but some of what she's, and this is still in the Science of Stuck, where it's kind of like, and this was almost like another green light moment for me where I'm like, yeah, I'm grateful for all these things, but these things also really suck.
Yeah.
So those two things can actually exist in the same time frame, in the same moment, and it actually
and it doesn't have to makes depress you or shut you down.
But you can say, yeah, I've got this happening in my life and it's crap, but I've also got
like the 80% of customer service problems we experienced today.
Yes.
80 out of 20.
80 out of 20. But anyway, I just thought that was kind of a, and a gratitude journal could also include the three things I'm grateful for and the one thing that really sucks.
Yeah.
And it's okay. And it doesn't have to ruin your life. And thinking about the things in your life that aren't that great doesn't mean you have a terrible life.
Right. And it doesn't have to
it just is down. What it is. So can you acquire skills that help you manage your emotions? And I firmly believe that yes.
And at any age.
At any age. Whenever you're ready to kind of.
But I do think that children who are not taught regulation have a struggle a lot longer in life.
Well, and I just think it's so interesting, like when the new kindergarten program came in and self-regulation became like the buzzword in education, right? And I think adults who were trying to teach it, some of them found it really hard to teach because they didn't have it themselves.
Right.
Right? Like, so how do you teach something? It's like when teachers would come in my office and say, oh, these kids are so messy. And then I'd walk down to the room and go, yeah, I wonder why. Like your room's a disaster.
Yeah.
And so you're standing up there trying to tell these kids to be organized and neat and everything. And yet you're totally disorganized, not neat. So everything is modeled, right? Like you can't. So,
well, and it's interesting. One of the comments in that book was young children model what their parents do to be liked, and they'll model the bad behaviors because they think that that's going to help them be liked. And I think in schools, the younger children, like
they want to be like their teacher.
They want to be liked by the teacher. They want to be liked by their peers. So they're going to do what the teacher does.
And they're going to do the things that they think are going to allow them to fit in, because belonging, right, that's the huge Brene Brown thing, right? Is that idea that we need to belong. But like the ruler, the regulation, understanding, like all that labeling, expressing, like all that stuff is super. Having some kind of thing in your head that you kind of like, that meta moment thing for me is huge, because sometimes I just think right now, I can't believe how this person is acting. And I have to take a meta moment.
Yeah.
And just stop talking or stop engaging and just kind of step back from it and almost be like, okay, there I am and there's that person, but here's me above it going, what the heck? I'm not engaging in this anymore.
Right.
I have to take a break and go at it from a different perspective. Because from that other book that I'm reading, like perspective taking is people just don't do it.
No.
And people... Like, and the one point in the book, he said that whoever this was has helped negotiate between like Iran and Iraq and in the Middle East and all that stuff. And he said never has he had a negotiation time where one group would take on the perspective and think about how the other group might be thinking or feeling.
Right.
At no time would anyone ever do that. So you think of all your like union negotiations and management and all this stuff. Does the other one really think about how the other and
perceives things or
feels, or just how things are impacted? Like, can you take someone else? Like this guy was saying, they never think about what are the issues or problems for the other side. Mm-hmm. So I found that very intriguing. And then I wanted to talk a bit about the pyramid, right? Because like emotions and decision making fit on a pyramid, right? So we all sort of start at the top of the pyramid. Yeah. And then if we make one decision, you're always only like one decision away from disaster kind of a thing.
If you slide down
the bad side of the pyramid. Yeah. But if say two people in a marriage start at the top of a pyramid and they don't figure out how to regulate and negotiate and make decisions, and they keep moving farther, then they end up on opposite sides of the pyramid, which
is like we say, grow apart, but
that's what it's about. So it's like really focusing on.
And it starts in small steps, like a frog in a boiling water.
Yes.
Slowly coming to a boil.
That's basically what. So, I mean, if your interest is to stay like close to your partner, then you have to I go back to this whole thing about handling conflict and figuring out how to make, to come to a consensus about a decision so that you're not both going down opposite sides of the pyramid. Yeah. Like unions do, right? Management is going down here, unions are going down here, and they just end up on total opposite sides until some government agency has to come in and say, this is what you're doing. Yeah. Which is pathetic, right?
It is, and it just wastes time and resources.
And then, so there's a grain of truth that helps create a successful marriage.
What?
Is that you have to figure those...
Yes, I'm sorry.
Right? Yeah. Like that you do have to,
work on consensus. And some people say, well, sometimes somebody has to make the final decision. I would say that is only the case in an urgent, time-sensitive emergency where one person has to make the call and the other person might be not able to.
Or, you
can't come to a consensus because there's,
well, and you're alone with the kids somewhere and something happens and you've got to decide the decision. Something. Yeah. But I mean,
if you know each other well enough and you've worked on this in other areas,
there's the moment where you say, what would and it's funny, like, I often think, well, my kids probably don't really have to ask me what I think about things because they can ask, but
we've always known.
They know what I think about things.
Yeah.
So, I mean, they talk about their decisions and stuff, but they would know what.
Yeah. And sometimes they've made a decision different than the way we would.
That's totally fine.
But as adult children, we've said
but in a successful marriage, you would go, ooh, my wife is going to be like
which way would she think?
No, or you go, in our family, our moral compass doesn't really allow us to do
that.
Because having a moral code and a moral compass that has grown together and not apart, I think is probably one of the biggest things that you've spent enough time talking about things or
well, then when the metaphorical cyclones and earthquakes happen, you can deal with
navigate them, right? Because you're not on so far apart on the pyramid. So I think one of the things that you talk about all the time in like marketing and all the other thing is story. And
the human brain is also wired for story. We look for patterns and we look for beginning, middle, and end, plus the crises. And there's a lot more analysis you can do about story, but it's how we process new ideas and everything. The more story there is, the better it is that we learn and understand.
Right. And I think listening to each other's stories and the stories that we tell ourselves
is important.
Is so important.
In that other book, Changing Minds, how many of us, so if I asked you today, where were you when when the Twin Towers were hit by airplanes, or when the Columbus, it depends how old you are.
The Space Shuttle Columbia, or the January
6th insurrection.
I know exactly where I was when that happened. Yeah. And the other one
if I ask you where you were and how you felt about it, and then 10 years later I asked you the same thing, some people will change their mind during those 10 years, but they will think that what they thought 10 years earlier is the same thing that they think at that moment.
Yeah.
When actually we do often change our minds about things, but we don't recognize that we have.
Yeah. But that's that whole importance of thinking about your own thinking.
Yeah.
And actually being tuned into how you think about things, and what are the stories.
Yeah.
And what are the stories that you tell yourselves.
Yeah.
And to actually be able to say, wait a minute, that's not what I said, last week about that. Wait, like what happened to my story, right?
Well, you don't forget.
No, I don't forget.
I do.
But I'm just saying, like, so the real importance of story, like how do we connect with people most, is through story.
Yeah. And listening and being curious about each other's stories.
I mean, I keep going back to that night that we had the kids, but we listened to them talking all the time that night. Like,
yeah, they had our
especially like attention. Mason and Charlotte now too has so many like stories and what she's trying to do and communicate. And so like tuning in and really listening to them is how you connect with them. Yeah. Right?
Yeah, absolutely.
And so in a marriage, right, if you're not tuning into each other's story, then that's another way that we connect. So I think we just have to be cautious of sometimes the story you tell yourself is lacking self-compassion, right?
You say you don't
like that. You say, "Oh, I'm a terrible person. I've done this, and this." Right. When that's not.
You also say negative stories about yourself,
right?
Which then becomes self-fulfilling prophecy. Yes.
So you do have to be careful about the stories.
Yeah.
So anyway, that is our little thing about
Matters of the Heart Part 2.
Matters of the Heart. We're connecting. I mean, really, we talked about a lot of stuff there, but
we've been reading and talking about a lot of
it.
Very interesting things.
Yeah, so we'll come back to some very interesting things another time. But our next one, we are actually going to record it with the two guys.
The cycling
one is next time. So July 30 days have September 31st, right?
Yeah.
Does July have 31 days?
It does.
Okay, because that's how I do it. 30 days has September, April, June, and November. All the rest of 31, except for February, which has 28 days.
And something about it arriving late.
Something like that.
I don't remember.
And except in leap year when it has 29. Anyway, that's my poem for the day. And we're going to do cycling next time, and we might be able to show you Sebastian's super cool bike that he's ordered from
the UK.
So anyway, and on top of all that, I'm doing a cycling challenge in August of 200 kilometers for kids cancer. And I've raised $600 so far.
$3 a kilometer.
$3 a kilometer. So cycling has become a thing right now.
Yeah. So July is for training and getting ready.
Yeah, and then August I'm gonna ride 200 kilometers. So.
Awesome. And I'll probably ride a lot of them.
Yeah, a lot of them. Probably not all of them, but a lot of them, because you have to go to work.
Yeah.
So anyway, well, so thank you for joining us for No Room for Phonies, Matters of the Heart.
Episode 68.